Right, so let me go. so sorry, did I lose my spot? So this ruling is not applied in any circumstances or condition. Naskh must involve an actual abrogation of a previous Islamic law, right? So the Quran actually creates legislation, right? As do the Hadith. They are the source of the law. They're not the final output of the law, but they're the source of the law, right? And therefore, it is different from another phenomenon called Bada, but we'll skip that. In order for the Nas to occur, there must have previously existed an Islamic ruling on exactly the same subject, which was then abrogated by a later ruling. So there must have been a precedent set, and the Naskh, basically cancels that precedent, overrides and supersedes that precedent. So the phrase of a ruling implies that Naskh is only valid in law and not in belief, in Aqidah. So that's their creed. Aqidah is creed, right? So for instance, we have the Nicene Creed, right? And they have their own creeds as well. So the Nasikh is valid in law. So in other words, if it abrogates the Quran is a legal document, it's a legal text, which makes Islam a legal system and a political system. And very little of it is actually a religion then. So Naskh cannot occur with regards to belief in Allah, His names and attributes, the Day of Judgment, and other matters related to the fundamentals of belief. So He has ordained for you the same religion which He ordained for Noah. So now you know, according to Yasir Qadhi, let me see, Kale, Sharia law is based on a savage pagan totalitarian civilization. It's full of holes, of course. And so according to Yasir Qadhi, Allah has ordained for Muslims the same religion, and for you, of course, as this person watching me. He ordained for you the same religion which He ordained for Noah. So now you know Noah was a Muslim. And that which we have inspired to you, O Muhammad, and that which we have ordained for Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. So Muhammad is following the same religion as Noah, who was a Muslim, Abraham, who was a Muslim, Moses, who was a Muslim, and Jesus, who was a Muslim, saying that you should establish the religion and make no divisions in it. That's Quran 142, verse 131. So chapter 142, verse 131. You should establish the religion and make... So all these other failures obviously didn't do the job right, and Mo had to come along and fix it. I keep losing my mouse. So, also the ruling that is abrogated, the mansukh, must originate in the Quran or the Sunnah. Naskh cannot occur with respect to ijma, which is the consensus of the scholars, and this is the actual final ruling. The ijma, the consensus of the scholars, is contained within the fiqh, the Islamic law. It's written in their books of Islamic law. Or qiyas, analogy, which is how they derived the law. So you take the application. So the Quran says something, so how do you apply that general rule to a specific situation in Islamic life? Well, that's what the analogy provides. Of course, by the same token, they'll say Jesus never said this, but Paul did that. Well, Paul's applying, that's called qiyas, by analogy, reasoning by analogy. He's applying this concept to this new situation. How do we follow the spirit of the law rather than the letter? Of course, it's okay in Islam, but when Paul does it in Christianity, Paul's an evil Satanist who corrupted Christianity, right? When Muhammad does it, it's just all good stuff. So in other words, no ruling that is derived from ijma or qiyas can be abrogated. Now that's very interesting, right? A ruling that the scholars derive, right, can be abrogated. You can't abrogate the scholars. That's interesting. Am I reading this correctly, guys? Am I reading this correctly? So the ruling must originate in the Quran or Sunnah, and Naskh cannot occur with respect to ijma, the consensus, or the method of reasoning, of deriving a ruling by the scholars. In other words, no ruling that the scholars derive, right, through qiyas, and that ultimately becomes the law, the consensus, the agreed upon meaning, the agreed upon ruling by all the scholars of the four schools of jurisprudence, can be abrogated. So the scholars cannot be abrogated. So if the scholars said, if the Quran says the sky is blue and the scholars now say the sky is purple, because Allah did this and there's that and there's this in the Quran and this in the Sunnah, and actually what He meant by blue was purple, then well, you cannot argue with the scholars. The scholars are right, because the scholars have correctly interpreted the Quran. They've discovered the meaning that you as a layman don't know. So this is due to the fact that Naskh can occur only during the lifetime of the Prophet, right? And whereas ijma and qiyas must occur after the Prophet, as any student of usul al-fiqh knows, therefore these cannot be abrogated. Okay, well, Quran 42:13, Islam's totalitarian system, which there are components, religious, military, economic, and social. Yes, it is. It's basically communism with Allah. So yeah, let's move on.